Hi, this is Paul, and we've been walking through the Heidelberg Catechism. And misery is the smallest of the sections. There's an introduction, there's misery, and then there's deliverance. And we're getting to deliverance. Lord's Day 5. I don't know how many Lord's Day I'll cover. They go quickly, and they don't necessarily make a lot of different points. According to God's righteous judgment, we deserve punishment, both now and in eternity. How then can we escape this punishment and return to God's favor? God requires that his justice be satisfied. Therefore, the claims of this justice must be paid in full, either by ourselves or another. Now, what this has is very much a take on sin that uses the metaphor of debt. And that's a very common one. We use it in a variety of ways. I am in your debt. If someone does something for us, we feel they are in our debt. And people just sort of work that way back and forth. In our estuary class the other day, it's not really a class, it's an estuary meeting, we were talking about friendships and how one could say thank you to someone else. And often someone wants to say thank you and they'll give you a gift. And it's like, well, I don't know if I want to be in your debt, because if I'm in your debt, you can ask for something. So one of the things that we do in our culture, and I think a great many other cultures, is we do sort of keep track of things. I read this book quite a few years ago, Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And it's really a very interesting book because it talks about sort of the origin of money, and it goes back and forth around a bunch of things. It talks about the myth of barter, that everybody just thought of that money came out of as a way to try to barter and deal with one another. And his thesis was, well, not really. It's probably much more likely that our notion, or that money comes out of debt. And, this isn't just in Christianity. There's whole ranges of religions that have had these ideas. And so here's this. I just, in fact, pulled this up right now. In being born, every being is born as a debt owed to the gods, the saints, the fathers, and to men. If one makes a sacrifice, it's because of a debt owing to the god from birth. If one recites a sacred text, it's because of a debt owing to the saints. If one wishes for offspring, it's because of a debt due to the fathers from birth. Poor mothers get no mention. And if one gives hospitality, it's because of debt owing to men. So Graeber in his thesis basically says, really, a lot goes down to this sense of indebtedness. So in this question and answer, the answer begins, God requires that his justice be satisfied. And again, I don't think that's a difficult idea for us to get a sense of. I've been watching this show on Max, which details Robert Durst. And Robert Durst killed his first wife in 1982. And right away, her family was very suspicious because she just disappeared. They've never found the body. And normally, if that would happen, thinking just of myself and one of my sons, if one of my daughters-in-law went missing, I would be, I'd want, what do we need to do to find her? What do we need to do to help? What do we need to do to rectify and remedy this? And none of Robert Durst's family did any of those things. And Robert Durst never did any of those things. One of the most unconvincing moments of O.J. Simpson, who professed his innocence, which many people have never believed. I'm going to find Nicole's killers. Didn't really seem to make much of an effort. We have a sense of justice, and satisfaction is such an interesting word that's coupled with justice, because justice is something that must be satisfied and then we can rest. And so for years, during that crazy story of Robert Durst in Jinx, her family was not satisfied. They suspected he did it, and they would not rest. And you'd find friend after friend saying, I won't rest until we get justice. Now, this is a very slippery slope for human beings, because often we overstep. The beginning of the Godfather movie opens up with someone coming in. His daughter had been this man's daughter had been abused, and he comes to the godfather because he wants the man who abused his daughter killed. And the godfather says, you're not asking for justice, you're seeking revenge. Here the idea is, well, the universe is governed by God, and one of the things that I really try to push people back on is that, on one hand, God is personal and portrayed in a personal fashion in the Bible, but on the other hand, God is also sort of like an arena. And one of the big challenges, I talked about this last week, we had talked about Bill Maher. Many people say there is no such thing as sort of justice in the universe. That, and the reason people say it is quite obvious. People seem to get away with a lot. And often people don't seem to get what is their due. Now, the biblical authors knew this. In fact, you cannot read the Old Testament and not hear this lament and this complaint and this crying out to God over and over and over and over and over again. And the Bible, despite all this crying out, continues to say God is a God of justice, and somehow, some way, the wrongs of planet Earth will be addressed. And again, the Bible is not unique in this. This is a very common theme throughout religions all over the world. That somehow, some way, people have an intuitive sense that justice needs to be done. And if justice isn't done, if somehow we don't have some credible belief that somehow the wrongs of this world will be righted, well, if you go there, you tend to slip into nihilism, and you tend to slip into usually bad things. Again, Miroslav Volf brought this out. I brought this out last time, that in the breakdown of the Yugoslavian Civil War, it's just reprisals. And if there is no God to somehow balance the scale at the end, then it's just up to us, and human beings are going to overreach, and we're going to set up cycles of reprisals, blood feuds, and around and around and around and around we'll go. And we see that happening, and it is not hard to see. There's one YouTube commentator that looks at all of the fighting in the Middle East, and the comment that he makes often is, everyone in the Middle East needs to have the last word. And what that means is Hezbollah will fire missiles into Israel, Iran will back them, Israel will hit back, and then everybody's hitting back from the last hitting back, and it just goes on and on and on. And we have a sense that this somehow must stop. But it never seems to stop in this world. And if you believe that all there is this world, and if all of us believe that, it's going to be a very bloody world, and it's never going to end. And so the Bible isn't alone in this. Many religions have this. The idea that God, at the end, will weigh. You can find this in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. God will call human history to account, and justice will be done. And actually, that thought alone affords a fair amount of consolation to the victims of tragedy in this world. But it's at the same time a warning. God requires that his justice be satisfied. Therefore, the claims of his justice must be paid in full. And again, this is sort of a using the metaphor of debt. The Bible has a variety of metaphors that it uses for sin. Sin is missing the mark. So sometimes sin is just failure to achieve. Sometimes sin is an obligation. There's that language of debt. Sometimes sin is a stain. The Bible has a variety of metaphors that it uses for sin. The Heidelberg Catechism at this point uses the idea of debt. And you can find that in the Old Testament and the Mosaic Law, where if in fact, let's say you borrow a neighbor's donkey, and that donkey dies because you mistreated it or haven't taken care of it or something like that, you owe your neighbor a donkey. And everybody gets this. It's very unusual to find a human being that would say, no, they don't owe me anything. Well, why not? And then if you ask them when they said that, they'll usually say, oh, because they've been so good to me, so I'm not worried about it. And people will do that too. But we keep track of each other. And so Graeber in his book basically says money doesn't come from barter. Money comes from debt. Because we go into debt with each other. And we're all sort of keeping tabs. Now, again, we're not good tab keepers. When you go to the New Testament and you look at 1 Corinthians 13, love keeps no record of wrongs. Boy. You know, if every unhappy couple could achieve that, there'd be fewer unhappy couples. Therefore, the claims of this justice must be paid in full, either by ourselves or someone else. And here again, they introduce the idea that if I borrowed your donkey, I mistreated your donkey died, I didn't have enough money to repay the donkey, usually a parent might step in and say, I'll pay it. I saw a movie recently. It was on streaming on one of the servers. Must have been on Paramount. The movie was called Finest Kind. And I had no idea what the movie was about. And it's a movie about fishermen. And he's a father and son. The boat's name is Finest Kind, and they're both captains, and it's a movie about what's going on in their lives, and, well, they get an opportunity to make a drug run, and the money gets stolen. And the son is in trouble, and the father steps in and tries to pay the debt of the son. Now, it's more complicated than that, but again, this is an old story and an old way of thinking, and the Heidelberg Catechism just simply assumes you know this, and you know the truth is a lot of people complain about substitutionary atonement, but people complain about it, but I see people living by it every day. We find ourselves in the debt of others, and we try to repay. And if not, if I find that one of my children is in trouble with someone and they don't have the means to pay, I, as their father, will step in and pay for them. Why? Because I love my child. And at that point, my child might feel like they're in my debt. Probably if a good child, they would. If they're a bad child, they won't. And there's a little clue. This indebted business, it's people who are responsible that feel this way. And we would say that what they're feeling connects with the truth. So it's not hard to believe that if you start the story saying God made a world full of glory and beauty, well, we can talk about Isaiah 5. I will sing a song for the one I love. A song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut a winepress as well. He looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judea, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could be done for my vineyard than what I've done for it? The vineyard owed him something. Now I will tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. I'm going to take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled, and I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. He looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. God looks for justice, and rightly so. And someone should offer him the proper return on his investment. Can we make this payment ourselves? So, again, part of the irony of this text is the more sensitive your conscience, the more you will feel its weight. If you don't have much of a conscience at all, you probably won't feel it at all. Because when I think about you can leave God out of it. When I think about the ways I have missed the mark with other people in my life, I don't have enough life to make up. In fact, in many cases, I have absolutely no idea how I would make it up to people. Now, sometimes people just withhold forgiveness. But again, almost universally in human beings, we have judges. And when two people are in a fight, a judge comes between them and looks at this case and says, you owe this person this. Now, not everyone is satisfied by what they get, but there's an idea that there needs to be a payment when there's wrong, even though in many cases, no payment can be made. There was an interesting movie about 9/11 and all of the people who lost their lives in the airplanes and in the Twin Towers. And ironically, the United States paid that. The United States didn't owe that. The airlines had to pay. I mean, someone has to pay. Children are without fathers and mothers. There will not be college funds. And so we as a society basically come together and try to find payment. The problem is, in most cases, with our dollars and cents, there's no way for us to pay this stuff. Now, maybe if I wrong you in a small way, apology will be good enough. Maybe if I wrong you in a more substantial way, there needs to be a monetary payment to maybe be for you or your children. But if I wrong you in a very deep way, there's probably nothing I can do. And when I look out around this world, I find there are a lot of people who have wronged a lot of other people, and there's no way these debts can be paid. Now, if we take all of this and think about God and his ownership of all of this, we can't pay this. Actually, we increase our debt every day. Catechism is a little brutal, but true. Can another creature, any at all, pay this debt for us? And this is where things get tricky, because what other creature could? Now again, this is sort of built on the Old Testament sacrificial system. And in the sacrificial system, an animal would pay the debt for a human. And I often think about that as the animal paying the interest, because the animal can't really pay the debt. Because, truth be told, the animal is innocent of the human's wrongdoing. But yet, even animal sacrifice was an accommodation made by God for our inability to make it right. It's another way to say it. No, to begin with, God will not punish any other creature for what a human is guilty of. Why should the animals pay for what we've done? That doesn't seem right. And again, I don't think any of these ideas are hard for us to think about. I think sometimes people think about them too thoroughly and they're like, it just seems obvious. Furthermore, no mere creature can bear the weight of God's eternal wrath against sin and deliver others from it. Notice the second section too, because making things right is not just a matter of payment, it's also a matter of delivery. And if you look at human history, there seems to be no end to the wrongs that we've done, and so many of the ways that we try to fix things just make things worse. What kind of mediator and deliverer should we look for? Now, last week in my sermon, I talked about Moses as a mediator. So again, it's not hard to have a sense of what a mediator is. What we're looking for is someone who can pay our debt. I've been watching the series Squid Game a little bit on Netflix. I'm only in the second episode. But what strikes me is that all of the people that volunteer to go into this really awful competition for a big piggy bank full of money are in debt. And all of their debts are different. Often they're indebted to a parent. Often they've lost face. It's a Korean show, and it's really quite well done. I remember when it hit, a lot of people were quite interested in it. I didn't watch it right away. Not everybody in my family wants to watch it, so I get a chance to watch little bits of it here and there. But it struck me the weight of debt and the attempts of people to get out of it. And they're looking around for a way out of their debt. And this is true of people who are good people with sensitive hearts. They want to find a way out of debt. And so they're looking for help. Who can help me? And the Catechism says, well, they've got to be true, and they've got to be righteous, and they've got to be human. Because that category, well, you should hold to it. But they have to be more than human. And so they should also be God. So maybe I'll leave it there for now. That's Lord's Day 5. And the rest of the Lord's Days are sort of setting up an argument and saying, I think responding to questions that people often have, that how does all of this stuff address my real life? Now, in many ways, understanding debt and obligation and sin, I think that's fairly easy to understand. But when we look at the Bible and when we talk about humanity, we're looking at an enormous canvas. And when we think about all of the wrongs done in the world, we are looking for something to address all of it. We are asking a scale that holds all of the sin in a creation for all of its existence to be balanced. And not only to be balanced, to be put right. And I think the Catechism rightly notes, only God can do something that big. And pretty soon we're going to meet Jesus. So, Lord's Day 5.